Hi everybody, thank you very much for inviting me today. We have 20 minutes, so this is really going to be the definition of a whistle-stop tour of safeguarding. So I do apologise if it seems like I'm skimming over things. There are some links at the end, and obviously I'll be around, so if anybody has any questions afterwards, please do let me know. We've already heard the headline stories today, we've already heard about the mid-staffs, we've already heard about the Winterbourne View. And for those reasons, it's not surprising that every time that there's been a piece of policy or guidance or new legislation for the past approximately 10 years, they have been putting safeguarding front and centre. So I've tried to pick out what I think are possibly the three main pieces of legislation and what we're looking to see in the future that would affect people in this room. As I said, I'm sure I'll be missing some things out, so I do apologise in relation to that. One of the more interesting ways in which safeguarding has become front and centre is through the Charity Commission. In 2016, at the end, the Charity Commission announced that when they were going to be doing investigations and inspections, they were going to be considering what trustees were doing in relation to safeguarding. Now, previously, potentially people had considered that trustees were one removed from the day-to-day activities. But no, the Charity Commission says we are going to be looking at what you, the trustees, are doing in relation to safeguarding. And obviously that filters down. So it's what, as a charity, are you doing for safeguarding? Have you got the correct people on your board who are holding you to account? And how are they doing it? And the Commission has put this not only front and centre in word terms, but also in relation to their actions. As you'll see in relation to the statistics up there, it used to be approximately 15 statutory inquiries in 2012, 2013, 12 in 2011, 2012, 1,032 operational compliance cases, and 103 statutory inquiries between 2014 and 2015. So this is really something where the Charity Commission is saying, we have made a commitment to putting safeguarding front and centre, and we are going to use our powers to enforce it. We obviously see the same with CQC, and we'll get on to that. It is relatively confusing guidance, and I apologise. Up here, you will see that I'm referring to the Office of the Public Guardian. In your sheets, I've put the link to the children's guidance. If you go to the same area on the website as you see the link at the end of the slides, you'll be able to find the adult safeguarding as well. The reason that I put this up there is because sometimes the legislation can be a little reactive and the guidance can be a little reactive. They decided they wanted to put safeguarding front and centre, but one hand didn't speak to the other. So we have two separate sets of guidance, neither of which actually refer to each other. There's the adults and the children's guidance as to what they expect from charities in terms of safeguarding, and then there's the Charity Commission itself. And as I've said, in relation to the statistics, the Charity Commission has enforceable powers, and it really does use them. But neither of these documents refer to each other. So it can be perfectly possible that you are absolutely in compliance with the adult guidance, and indeed with the children's guidance, but not in compliance with what the Charity Commission thinks that you should be doing. So it's a matter of really looking through your legislation, or indeed getting your trustees to do it, looking through, checking, making sure that your policies, your procedures, your guidance documents, your day-to-day activities really do reflect what all of the legislation out there and all of the guidance out there says. We're supposed to have joined up thinking in legal terms, but it doesn't actually quite happen, and that's why lawyers are around, unfortunately. We're here to advise you a lot of the time. It's vital for trustees to understand what this new picture of safeguarding actually means to them. They're responsible for ensuring that those benefiting from or working with their charity are not harmed in any way through contact with it. And there are a number of cases recently where what's actually happening on the front line of a charity has become frontline news or front page news because they have not been obeying the strict policies and procedures that they should have been. And those trustees of those charities have been openly and publicly criticised, and indeed can be prevented from being trustees again. So it's incredibly important. The second bullet point is potentially the most important in relation to this, because a trustee cannot delegate any of their duties, including safeguarding. So it is not simply enough to say, well, we thought about it. You have to be able to document that you've actually done something about it. Now, if in terms of the policies and procedures, the policy looks good, the policy complies with the current legislation, how are you as a trustee going to be able to tell whether or not that's actually working on the ground? And that's checking your risk registers, checking your audits on a regular basis, getting your managers or your supervisors to come in and talk at the board meetings. And of course, the bottom point, and this is something that I think every speaker has said so far, but the Commission will assess whether the board actively discusses policies and procedures. How are they going to do that? We don't film any of our board meetings. It's about documenting it. As it always is in the health and social care sector, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Make sure that it's down in your minutes. And that is as relevant to people on the ground who are trying to talk to trustees who are saying, we have concerns in relation to this, or we want you to look at this policy. Make sure that you put it in writing, put it in an email. It sounds like a silly, lawyery, protecting yourself kind of way of doing things. But actually, if there is ever a safeguarding concern, and you as a member of the staff on the front line have said, I've raised a concern, you need to be able to show that you've done it. So put it in an email, put it in a letter, and obviously always keep a copy. As with the CARE Act, the emphasis is on making sure that this is in the practice itself. So its staff at all levels have to understand potential safeguarding situations, know how and have the confidence to report them, and ensure that concerns are followed up and appropriately addressed. And again, it's something that we'll come back to later, but this refers to all levels of safeguarding. So not just those that you think are going to hit the local front page, but making sure that the small, potentially the more insidious, everyday indignities are being documented and are being investigated, and that your policies and procedures recognise the range of safeguarding that is out there. And that brings us to the CARE Act. Obviously, we've spoken about the CARE Act a number of times over today, and there is a very, very good reason for that. It was the first time that safeguarding was ever put front and centre into legislation. Obviously, it was described as, the biggest change in the law in 60 years. There was an increase in safeguarding cases overnight, safeguarding investigations. But putting it at front and centre in terms of the legislation wasn't simply in name only. What it was there to do was to give people at the front line the power to be able to utilise the legislation. It genuinely is the most useful piece of legislation I think that I have ever read, not just as a law geek, but actually as somebody that's worked in the sector for quite a while. It does what it says on the tin. It tries to provide an actual way for people to utilise the legislation on the ground. And you'll notice that in the back I put links to guidance documents for the CARE Act. They're actually user-friendly documents. It's really surprising, but definitely, if you have time, do check them out. I'm sure I'll go through this as a whistle stop, but the changes for providers, obviously, it's making sure that there is a nuanced, person-centred approach. Again, person-centred is something that we've heard a lot today, but it's making sure that the individual's care and support provision is a bespoke package, that it's tailored to their needs. Central to the system is to make sure that the service user has actually had a voice. Again, this comes back to making sure that you document it. Everybody wants the best for their service users, of course they do, but it's about making sure that you can demonstrate that they've had the opportunity to engage with their package. And again, it's something that the CARE Act comes back to again and again and again. This is bespoke care packages. It's through early engagement, and I don't know why it's turned light blue there, but that says prevention rather than crisis management. Now, this is where I tend to have a cue hollow laughter section, because there is a section in the Care Act where it says that local authorities must not undertake any actions which may threaten the sustainability of the market as a whole, that is, the pool of providers able to deliver services of an appropriate quality, for example, by setting fee levels below an amount which is not sustainable for providers in the long term. But actually, it's really, really useful that it's there. It isn't just for a laugh. It is actually there for you to use, and some providers are using it. It is Section 5 of the Act. This is not as a cure for insomnia, as most legal texts are. This is something that every single person in the room should read. You should use this section of the Care Act to go to your local authority and say, no, enough is enough. You have an obligation to provide to me enough money to make sure that I can do the thing that is your responsibility to do. You've delegated that power to me, and I'm very, very happy you have, and I have the experience and I have the knowledge to make sure that I can do it. But I can't feasibly do it at the fee level that you have provided to me. I'm sure that's something that everybody in this room has encountered. But there are providers out there who are using this section of the Act successfully to be able to obtain more money, more resources, being able to find those inventive ways of maybe working with other organisations. But it is incredibly useful as a document. And as I said, you don't necessarily need to look at the wordy legislation itself. Look at the guidance documents that are attached, and I've put links to them. But we've run very, very successful cases with them before. I know of other providers around the country who are using other law firms to do it. So really do have a look at that. And this is the point, because the Care Act says they're creating a package of legislation which is there to create bespoke and tailored care plans so that everybody has the opportunity to live the best life that they could live. Now, as we've just heard, the best life that they could live often sometimes comes down to what do they consider to be the best life that they have. Now, anybody that works in health and social care, obviously you all came in it for the money, I know that, but secondary to the financial rewards that you get as a result of it is the fact that you want to help people. You want to make sure that people can have the best life that they possibly can. But we also want people to be safe. Now, if I had my choice in relation to people that I know that interact with health and social care services, I would like to wrap them up in cotton wool and then bubble wrap and maybe put them in one of those like glass hamster ball things so that they don't ever get any illness ever. But that probably wouldn't make them that happy, even though that would make me really reassured. And actually, Lord Justice Mumby said, what good is making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? It's a really tough thing, and I know that you know that more than me because you see it on the front line every single day. But what the Care Act says is that the well-being principle has to be at the heart of everything that you do. You're putting people in control of their own lives. Again, I'm not sure why it's in light blue, but that says no decision about me without me. We aren't in a paternalistic world anymore. The legislation, the case law, does not simply say, yes, as care providers, you know best, go forth and bubble wrap. It's unfortunately released the bubble wrap to the extent that you can and allow people to make poor choices if you can handle that in a risk-sensitive way. It's very interesting. I was actually at the breakout group for the Ombudsman service, and the gentleman that was giving the talk was talking about the no secrets guidance, and he said that they had received fewer safeguarding complaints than they had done previously. I didn't realise this statistic, since the no secrets guidance was taken away. Because what the Care Act does is it allows people to actually take legislation, to think about their care plans, to think about their actions, to think about how they helping service users on a day-to-day basis. And because it's prevention rather than crisis management, you're thinking about all of those things that could happen, all of those risks that are always there, and you're trying to mitigate from the word go. And apparently, there has been a significant drop-off in relation to safeguarding cases because of this. It is, of course, not perfect, but again, without wanting to go through it, Section 42 is your watch point in relation to this. This is what takes over from the no secrets guidance itself. And as it says on the tin, as we've heard before, safeguarding is protecting an adult's right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. As I said, this is significant because it genuinely is, and it's shocking to think about it, but it's genuinely the first time that somebody has tried to define the word safeguarding in a piece of legislation. Previously, it was just one of a number of nice words in a tick box. It is no longer. It is front and centre. So this is what it is. Keeping the wellbeing principle at the centre dictates sharing relevant information at the earliest signs of concerns, and that to do otherwise would be to neglect the promotion and protection of service user wellbeing. So what does that mean in practice? Well, in practice, Section 42 and the guidance documents that are attached go through some really useful examples, and it will be something that I'm going to get to, if I have time, is about using really practical, real-world, environment-centred example. So it's no use you using an example of a care home if you're an advocacy group in a community and vice versa. You need to make sure that the way in which you're translating Section 42 to the ground is actually relevant. So in relation to this, it says that you have to have clear operational policies and procedures, and they must give staff clear direction as to what to record and in what format. Again, it's the point of making sure that that your policies and procedures are the most user-friendly for you and your staff. It is about clear direction. It's not legalese. It is not unbelievably confusing council speak. It is what would work for your organisation when something happens on that day. Who do you talk to? Which form do you use? Make it as simple as possible for everybody. And once you've created your policy, make sure that people actually know it exists. So having it in an easily accessible place, making sure that you have the training and that your training is, again, meaningful, that it is environmentally specific, and then making sure that it is relevant to the statutory guidance. Again, I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but do go back to the Care Act guidance and the links at the back, because providers have to understand that there's a range of safeguarding. It's something that was referred to just now, that you have those smaller incidents, but the smaller incidents can be just as insidious and, in fact, likely to have actually a systematic abuse issue going through them. And that's why, for example, things like financial abuse have been coming to the fore, because they weren't necessarily noticed as much as a bruise, for example. So it's very, very important to recognise that you have this range of safeguarding, and that sometimes it's just having a talk with somebody. If they, for example, have been giving money away to somebody when they go and meet them in the community, what little steps can you take to assist that person? And there are some really good examples in the guidance. But sometimes it is more, and sometimes it is do not pass go directly to the police, as it were. And again, the document on the side there is guidance for providers on developing internal audit adult safeguarding policies and procedures. It's a really, really useful document. What isn't useful is this. This is how, in a perfect world, this was supposed to happen. We're supposed to have the Care Act, which created really useful statutory guidance, and I'll highlight that it's statutory guidance. Most guidance is discretionary. The Care Act said all of its guidance documents, so the way in which it translates the legalese into real world, it is something with which you must comply. They were supposed to translate to the local safeguarding policies, and all of the local authorities and the councils were supposed to go and change all of their safeguarding documents, and then that was supposed to translate to your policies and procedures on the ground. It was supposed to unify standards. In reality, again, one hand hasn't talked to the other a lot of the time, and your local authority documents may actually differ significantly from the Care Act guidance itself. And actually, a lot of the time, it doesn't matter if you're the best practice document, because when the local authority come in, if there is a safeguarding concern, if the Safeguarding Adult Board come in, and they cross-reference the two documents, they will be working off their own document first. And then you're on the back foot, because then you're in a position of having to deal with the safeguarding concern and having to challenge them because their guidance is incorrect. Where you have the opportunity, and I appreciate everybody in this room is under-resourced and underfunded and understaffed, you need to make sure what your local authority documentation says, where your local Safeguarding Adult Board actually thinks it's coming from in relation to its various investigations. And if you do think there's a discrepancy between that and best practice, highlight it with them, again, in writing. If you have concerns about that, again, talk to your local CQC inspector. Make sure that you are doing everything that you can proactively to make sure that your policies and procedures are the gold standard and that everybody knows that. Yes, so provider responsibilities. Everyone must be trained in relation to Mental Capacity Act and DOLS to an extent. So you've got managers, senior staff have to be trained. Staff have to have at least a basic awareness, and that is all staff. I'm sure you know this, but you'd be surprised the number of times that providers come to us and they've been caught out, for example, by CQC, because somebody spoke to the receptionist and the receptionist didn't know how to report a safeguarding incident. It really is a matter of any single person who can come into contact with any vulnerable person in your care, and obviously in your care in the community could just be somebody that's walking through reception, for example. You need to make sure that the person behind reception does know, if they see a concern, how they are going to report it. Again, as I've said, the training has to be clear and it has to be absolutely relevant, and use real-life examples. Now, one of the things that, because I have 20 minutes, which are rapidly running out, that I haven't gone into is Mental Capacity Act and DOLS. Again, everybody in this room will probably know Cheshire West was the piece of case law that changed DOLS overnight. We had a tenfold increase within 6 months in relation to the number of applications that were going through. And the government finally realised they had to do something about it. There was a commission. I know a few people that were on the commission. Every time I see them at events, I was saying, so when's the guidance document coming out? Because I'm going to be doing a Mental Capacity Act talk soon. I'd really like to know. And they're like, so would we. So unfortunately, we now have a situation where we do have a recommendation. We have a recommendation of something called the Liberty Safeguards. We do know that what the recommendation is that it should apply to 16 and 17-year-olds, and that what would effectively be the best interest decision, that it would be at the heart of DOLS, will only apply to the more serious of cases. We don't actually know what the definition is going to be of the more serious cases, and we certainly don't even know whether or not the government is going to adopt it or when they're going to adopt it. The last time estimate that we were given in terms of the government actually getting it through as a bill was last month, and they said a minimum of 12 months. So we are a long time away. That doesn't mean that we close our ears to it. Obviously, we need to know what is happening on the ground, but right now, the advice, unfortunately, in relation to DOLS is, if in doubt, refer. This is a very, very quick point, but should be obvious. No professional should assume that somebody else will pass on information. By professional, I don't just mean professional as in regulated, so a regulated nurse, for example. A professional in this scenario is anybody that works in health or social care. And there was a question earlier, I'm sure everybody knew the answer to it, but do you need to be DBS checked if you work in health and social care? Yes. Everybody that comes into contact with children or vulnerable adults will need to be DBS checked. What does it mean if you're DBS checked? Well, it means you can be referred to the DBS. So most people think, oh, well, if I get in trouble as a registered nurse, for example, the Nursing and Midwifery Council can investigate me, and the Nursing and Midwifery Council, in absolutely the worst case scenario, could strike me off the register. if you're referred to the DBS, and if the DBS assess that they would like to bar you from either working with children or vulnerable adults, that is not just the end of your health and social care career, that is, you can no longer drive your kids' school bus on the trip. You can no longer help out in the creche at your local mosque. It is so wide-ranging, it is unbelievable, and most people don't understand the implications. They just think, DBS check, I don't have any cautions or convictions, it's just a part of my employment law. It is so much more than that. So everybody has to realise and tell your staff, if there are concerns, you have a duty to report it, and if you don't report, you will be seen to be complicit, and there will be investigations. Now, in relation to the Care Quality Commission, obviously a lot of the providers in this room are going to be regulated by the Care Quality Commission. I'm not going to go over, obviously, what we've already heard. Everybody knows the remit of the Care Quality Commission, but just to say that they too put safeguarding front and centre, I would say, not to disagree with the CQC themselves, but I don't think that safeguarding is just in the safe arena. I think that actually safeguarding goes throughout every one of the 5 key questions. Because if you mess up in relation to your policies and procedure, that is a huge hit in relation to the well-led sector. So I don't think it's just safe, I think it's everything. The 3 things that CQC say they need to know: do staff know what abuse is, how to spot it, how to spot when people may be at risk? Do staff know how to act when they spot abuse or the risk of abuse? And do staff learn from safeguarding incidents or safeguarding risks? And again, this is all staff who have direct or potentially unsupervised contact must know about this and will be asked. And how do we know that they'll be asked? Because CQC tells us. CQC provides the list of things that they will check before and during. All of these, again, this is just a little checklist for you. I would recommend a mock inspection every now and then, making sure that you know what it is that CQC are going to check, and then you go back and you check those things. Or you get one of your friends from a local home to come in and check your place at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, that's a really good time to come in, and you do it to them a week later. And you go through all of these documents and you see what they say about your safeguarding policies and what they say about how you are implementing safeguarding on a local level, and how you're using your risk register, and whether you're learning from it. It is all encompassing. And if you don't meet safeguarding, you aren't going to get above inadequate. So it's incredibly important. As has already been referred to, there are new guidelines coming out, the framework that's coming in November 2017. Very much like I was saying with MCA and DOLS, you need to know that this stuff is coming. You need to make sure that you're prepared for it and that your staff are prepared for it. And these are just some resources. So I do apologise. I think I'm actually 5 minutes over, but that was as quick as I could go. So thank you.